Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Today, Finance Minister presented the last full budget of the current government as the Lok Sabha elections are scheduled next year. Now, before analyzing the announcements done by the government, what is the context in which the budget has been presented? Now, I'll be discussing the context under four very important parameters. First, the pandemic. Second, the possibility of recession. Third one, inflation. And the fourth one, very near and dear to every one of us, the situation of employment. Let me start with the first one, pandemic. Now, every one of us knows that the COVID-19 affected not only the Indian economy, but also the global market. India experienced slowdown, then technically a recession, and as the economic survey says, the recovery is complete now. We don't have to be worried about the impact of the COVID now. Economy has completely recovered. But is it over? In the sense, for India, we may not discuss the impact of the COVID anymore or the recovery that is required from the impact of the COVID. But I'm pretty sure all of you have read the newspapers and you would have realized the pandemic even today is affecting some other country, that is China. China is experiencing a resurgence of COVID cases. Now, some of you might simply say, sir, if China is experiencing COVID crisis, why should I be worried? Why should India be affected because of that? A simple answer to that is because of trade relations. Thanks to globalization, India has a very good trade relation. Of course, there is a huge trade deficit. That's a problem. That's a concern. But we have a very important trade relation with China. And we are importing a lot of important raw materials such as activated pharmaceutical ingredients, which we import from China, which are necessary in the pharmaceutical sector. Same can be stated in context of solar sector. Same can be applied even in the context of automobile sector or many other sectors as well. Now, if there is one more pandemic or wave of the pandemic in China, and as a result of this, production in China is affected, exports are affected, it simply means even India would be affected by this. So first, pandemic. Second, inflation. Inflation in the recent times has been a cause of concern, not only for Governor of RBI, but even for all of us. But again, is inflation a cause of concern only for Indian economy? Of course, no. Western countries also have experienced a very high rate of inflation in recent times. And as a result of this, you might have read in the newspaper, the Federal Reserve, European Central Bank, etc. have increased their interest rates. Now, what is the impact of that? A simple understanding is, whenever there is a rise in the interest rate, especially in a developed market such as USA, there is a danger of capital outflow from India. And as we are discussing, the FOMC, that is basically the committee which decides the interest rates in USA, is actually discussing what should be done. Should they continue with the hike in the interest rates, or should they basically looking at the recent positive report on the employment should stop the hike in the interest rate. Now, on the domestic front, is inflation a cause of concern? And please understand, whenever there is a higher inflation rate, whether you like it, don't like it, doesn't matter, it will have a huge impact on the growth prospects of the Indian economy. With a higher inflation rate, RBI doesn't have any option but to hike the interest rates. And as a result of this, loans will get costlier and it will have a huge impact on investment, that is specifically private sector investment as well as the demand for loans in the market. But luckily, in the last couple of months, the retail inflation has actually cooled down. But necessarily doesn't mean there is no danger of inflation in Indian economy. Core inflation is higher, food inflation rate is higher. So second factor, inflation. Third very important factor, recession. Not specifically from the context of Indian economy, there is an expected recession that would take place in the developed countries. And if there is a recession eventually happening in the developed markets, rest assured, there will be an impact on the Indian economy. How so? Simple. Again, thanks to globalization, we are integrated with the global market. So we import a lot of goods and services. and more importantly, we want to export. And when there is a recession in the USA, let's say, and there is a recession in the European market, it will definitely have an impact on the imports as well as exports, which will go from India to rest of the world. And as such, in the recent times, the exports from the Indian market have actually gone down, and that is a cause of concern. And when the exports will go down, automatically the trade deficit widens, current account deficit will also widen. And the fourth very important parameter in the context of which the budget has been presented is the situation of employment. Now, many of you might simply say, sir, employment situation has improved. Agreed. But in the recent times, one after the other, not only the Indian companies, that is the domestic companies, even the multinational corporations have started firing the employees left, right, and center. The reason is, again, they are expecting a recession to take place. Some of the companies, because of the situation of their poor revenues, poor financials, have started removing the employees. And as per the recent data published for the last month, there is a 14-year high unemployment rate recorded for the Indian economy. So keeping in mind these particular four important factors or the context, the government of India today has presented the budget. Now let's look at the 7 very important priority areas, citing which the government has basically announced all their important announcements. The 7 important areas are: 1, infrastructure; 2nd, the green growth; 3rd one is inclusive development; 4th one is youth power; 5th one is unleashing the potential; 6th one is reaching the last mile; 7th one is financial sector, as mentioned in the graph or in the graphs on the other side. So let me begin the discussion for the budget announced by the government for the next financial year 23 and 24, with the first very important area, that is infrastructure. Now the infrastructure as such, please understand, is very, very important for a simple reason. Infrastructure is associated with multiplier effect. Now what is this multiplier effect? Let me explain it to you. Now, whenever you see infrastructure investment being done by the government, the reason is simple. Infrastructure leads to a lot of investment, not only by the private sector, even from the side of the government of India. And if you see the trend of investment in the infrastructure in the last couple of years, you will realize that in the last 4 to 5 years, there is a rising trend of investment by the government in infrastructure. For example, for the financial year 22-23, that is the financial year in which we are there right now, the government of India initially proposed investment, that is a capital expenditure of 7.5 lakh crore rupees. 7.5 lakh crore rupees, one of the highest that has been proposed by the government. And please understand, as per the revised estimates which are given by the government today, the 7.5 is not yet reached, but already they have achieved 7.3 lakh crore rupees. And please understand this is not the actual amount. Some of you will simply say, sir, if the government of India has proposed 7.5, they have basically invested only 7.3, then they have not achieved the target. In that context, you will have to remember 3 very important terminologies. 1, the budget estimates. Budget estimates are provided by the government, which basically says in the next 1 year, how much money I'll be spending or collecting. Revised estimates, government on the 1st of February, and please remember the financial year is not yet over. So on the 1st of February, will basically revise whatever announcements they have done in the last year. And finally, when the financial year is over, I repeat, when the financial year is over, and the current financial year is not yet over, it will get over on the 31st March of 2023. So please be very careful here. Government of India has proposed 7.3 lakh crore, 7.45 lakh crore rupees, out of which already 7.3 lakh crore rupees has been estimated, and after the end of the current financial year, I'm pretty sure it will be more than that, but that data you will get it in the next year's budget. Now some of you will have a look at it and say, sir, you are saying 7.5, 7.3, etc., but there is one more number here, 3.3 lakh crore rupees. What is that? Now, I'll tell you that. Before that, have a look at the budget estimates for the next financial year. The total capital expenditure that has been proposed, estimated by the government, is 10 lakh crore rupees. And please be very careful here. You will see that there is a hike of more than 33% in the capital expenditure that has been proposed by the government. And that trend is constant. That is basically more than 30% hike has been done in the last couple of years. Point number one. Point number two. Is it only that the government of India has proposed 10 lakh crore and nothing else will be invested in the capital expenditure? Of course, no. Whenever you talk about the central government or the budget announced by the central government, there are two very important components to look at. One, where government of India will directly spend the money, which will be counted as a part of capital expenditure. And second, the grants for the creation of capital assets. In your classes, I'm pretty sure you must have come across a terminology called as GCCA, grants for creation of capital asset, which is generally considered as a part of revenue expenditure, but nevertheless, that is also associated with creation of infrastructure, creation of assets. And that is the precise reason you will see there's a breakup of the total capital expenditure incurred either directly by the government of India or indirectly by the government of India. So to put it in a nutshell, the total capital expenditure or total expenditure that would be incurred in the next one financial year, as per the estimates given by the finance minister, is 13.7 lakh crore rupees. That is 10 lakh crore directly the part of capital expenditure, part of the budget, and second one is part of the revenue expenditure, 3.7 lakh crore rupees. Now, coming to the next point, some of you will basically remind me saying that, sir, you started the statement with the concept of multiplier without explaining it. I'll come to that now. Whenever you talk about the capital expenditure, it will refer to the investment in the asset. That is, let's say, government of India will spend money and develop roads, develop ports, airports, etc. And whenever there is an infrastructure investment done like this, either by the government or by the private sector, you will realize that there is a rising demand for, let's say, labor, rising demand for raw materials, rising demand for various other important components which are needed for the development of the infrastructure. And as a result of this, don't you think employment will be generated? Production of other goods and services will be improved. Households will start earning more and more, and that basically kickstarts a virtuous cycle in the economy. And that is the reason why Government of India has been spending so much amount of money in the last couple of years related to capital expenditure. So the first point, important point that you need to remember, and the most important one as far as I'm concerned, is the total amount of capital expenditure which will be spent by the Government of India will be 10 lakh crore rupees. Now, let me go to the second point.
Shyam sir, if you could
yes.
allow me to interrupt for 1 second.
Yes, sir.
So I have a question from the side of the students actually. So we have all been looking at this graph and we see all the buildings going up in an increasing order. Now, don't you think it would put a lot of pressure on the government's expenses? I don't think their revenues are actually increasing in that speed. So they are actually spending a lot of money in capital expenditure. Doesn't it put a lot of pressure on the government, or would it not compromise their priorities somewhere else?
Definitely yes. Whenever the government spends a lot of money on the capital side, or for that matter any side, the overall expenses of the government or expenditure of the government goes up. But on the other hand, it's basically an analysis where you need to understand that rising capital expenditure is always considered good. Point number one. Because government at any point of time, right, please understand this, will borrow money from the market, except in a case where the government has a surplus budget, which you will not see in the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years in India. So until and unless there is a surplus in the budget, government simply means borrows from the market. And when government borrows from the market, now you have to answer a simple question. Would you want to borrow from the market in order to develop an asset, or you want to borrow from the market for revenue expenditure? And the golden rule in the market is that you should borrow only to create an asset that is always economical, or let's say will provide a lot of benefits for the economy. That is point number one. Second point is, will it have an impact on the fiscal deficit? Yes, it will lead to higher fiscal deficit. But the advantage of having a higher expenditure like this is that the multiplier effect. As I've already discussed, it will lead to a lot of multiplier effect, or multiple outcomes can be achieved by the economy. And the third one, the government itself has given the data. The taxes have, or the collection in the taxes last year have increased by 11%. And even this year, right, we expect, that is when I say this year, for the budgeted year, we expect that the tax receipts are further going to increase by 11%. So with the rising tax receipts like this, it always makes better sense if the government of India uses the money to spend on capital expenditure rather than revenue expenditure. So let me go to the second point here. The government has announced that it will continue to support the states. Now, many of you will ask me, sir, what do you mean by supporting the states here? Simple. In the budget for the year 21, Government of India announced certain amount of money that would be loaned to the states for incurring expenditure under the capital head. And understand the term capital head, meaning creation of assets here. And in the last year's budget, that is basically when I say last year and this year, please understand I'm talking about the financial year 24 as the current year, because the budget is for that year. And when I say last year, assume it for the financial year 23. So for the last year, the Government of India further increased the amount of loans to 1 lakh crore rupees. And please understand this, the amount of loans of 1 lakh crore rupees, there were certain conditions attached to it. What is the condition? 1 lakh crore would be provided to the states. And all this 1 lakh crore is not unconditional, nor can I say all of it was conditional. Some part of it was unconditional. It would be distributed as per the recommendations of devolution provided by the 15th Finance Commission. And remaining was conditional to certain reforms being implemented by the state governments. Now this year government says, we will further increase it from 1 lakh crore rupees to 1.3 lakh crore rupees. From 1 lakh crores to 1.3 lakh crore rupees, which means there will be further more support by the central government to the state governments to develop infrastructure at the state government level. And that's very, very important. And again, what are the important features here? It is interest-free loans. Please understand this. It is interest-free loans. And second one is the loans will be given for a tenure of 50 years. The loans are given for a tenure of 50 years, which means the repayment will be done in 50 years, right? And as already mentioned, part of it will be conditional and remaining will be unconditional in nature. So second, the government has already announced that they will continue to support the infrastructure or the asset creation that is done by the state governments. Third one, UIDF. Very recently, there have been multiple reports in the context of urban finances. One report came from Reserve Bank of India, and when I say report, in one of their monthly bulletins, RBI in a detail discussed about urban finances or urban local body finances. And apart from this, even the World Bank also came out with a report which basically stated that in Indian economy, in the next couple of decades, the total population which resides in the urban bodies or in the area of cities will balloon. It will simply increase, and if the states and specifically the urban local bodies want to ensure that the infrastructure will be provided, required services would be provided to them, there would be a requirement of a huge amount of investment. And in connection to that, have a look at the third very important point here. Central government now proposes, it's a proposal right now, it has proposed to set up Urban Infrastructure Development Fund. Under the UIDF, the funds would be utilized for the development of infrastructure at urban level or at the city level. Again, please understand this, it is just a proposal. It is yet to be set up, and how much funds will be there, how it will be distributed, what conditions have to be met by respective cities to get the access to these funds, because there are certain conditions. For example, the central government or the finance minister stated that we would start providing assistance when the state government will ensure that the credit rating of the urban local bodies will improve, because that is one of the very important factors that is connected to the concept of municipal bonds. Because whenever any municipality for that matter wants to borrow from the market, they will have to have a credit rating. That is very, very important. So that is the third very important announcement in the context of infrastructure. The fourth one, related to infrastructure investment, the railways. I'm pretty sure all of you know this. Earlier, we used to have a separate railways budget. And this convention or the practice of separate railway budget has been discontinued, and now railways budget has been brought under the union budget itself. Now, what are the important announcements in case of railways? The capital expenditure is one of the highest. More than 2 lakh crore rupees will be spent in the railways development of infrastructure. In association with that, please have a look at the operating ratio. You will realize that operating ratio of the railways is actually improving in recent times. I have to understand this. It is actually improving in the recent times, but again, there is a concern over the operating ratio all over again, because please understand the operating ratio is basically a comparison between how much expenditure has to be incurred compared to how much revenue has to be generated. Now, when I say it has gradually improved or recently has been improved, don't worry about this data. From 1 year to next year, right, the data will keep on changing. But definitely, yes, the railways finances are under pressure. In addition to this, please have a look at the amount of expenditure that is incurred by the railways, right, compared to the amount of revenues that they are generating. And finally, also have a look at how much percentage of the revenues will come from the freight component of the railways and how much from the passenger component of the railways. So these are 3 very important areas. Please do not by heart any of this data. This is not going to be asked in the UPSC either in the prelims or mains. Right? So these are certain important areas of announcements within the infrastructure sector. Now, let me go to the next one, that is the next area of discussion. The next area of discussion will be green growth, which will be taken up by Harshmeet sir.
Before I come there and take up the green growth, one more question that I had in my mind.
Yes, sir.
We have been reading and discussing a lot about the financial problems in railways for a long time.
Yeah.
I remember at least more than a decade, the same talks go on that railway is not in a great financial condition. Do you think this time around the budget actually tries to revise that, the budget actually tries to help that, or no, the government is just trying to run the railways as it is?
The issue related to railways finances is nothing new. Right? Even before this year, there have been multiple instances where there has been a pressure on the finances of the railways. But rather than looking at only one budget, what would make it much better is an analysis of what reforms have been implemented by the ministry as well as the government in the last couple of years. For example, the government of India has proposed a railway plan of 2030, under which they want to increase the amount of freight transportation that is handled by railways. As per the government report, around 27% of the freight transportation actually is done by the railways. We want to further increase it to more than 40%. So in the budget, you may not find specifically certain announcements which will suddenly improve or let's say reverse the course of the finances of the railways. But in a totality, if you look at many of the other reforms announced by the government, definitely yes, there will be an improvement in the finances of the railways in the coming decades. So I'll be basically handing over the discussion to Harshmeet sir to take up the discussion related to green growth now.
Thank you very much for that, sir. Now, if any one of you have been reading and following what the government of India has been doing in the field of sustainable energy and in the field of switching to renewable energy sources, you would not be surprised. In fact, many of us expected a lot of announcements in this field. How is it that the government will now be moving towards renewable energy? Is the government actually planning to spend more money there? Now, there are a lot of initiatives that the government of India has taken in this budget. Let me quickly go over them one by one in a bit of detail. Now, before we begin analyzing this one by one, do remember the mantra is the devil lies in the details. Whenever the finance minister actually makes this speech, do remember the entire budget document has a lot more details apart from the announcements that are made over here. Now, if you actually see in the field of renewable energy, more specifically, in order to give a push to India towards using more and more renewable energy, the government of India has taken up a lot of initiatives. You all would know how the government of India has already committed to achieving net zero by 2070. And in order to achieve that goal, we have been investing a lot of money in different sources. For example, if you see how the government of India has been focusing a lot on solar. In the past few years, India has actually become one of the leading producers of solar energy in the entire world. From a time that solar panels used to be the most expensive source of producing energy, we have now been able to make it much more affordable. Not just this, if you have been following the government initiatives, you also would notice how the government is taking a huge bet on green hydrogen. Now, green hydrogen or using hydrogen as a fuel is not new. You would know, even today, many industries around the country actually use hydrogen as a source for their fuel. However, green hydrogen would be different in a sense that green hydrogen is prepared by ensuring that there is no harm done to the environment. Apart from that, if you look at how the government of India has encouraged more and more people to take part in these initiatives, one very interesting thing that the government of India has come up with is the Green Credit Program. Now, what exactly is this and how would it actually impact Indian government's efforts to go green? Now, in simple terms, local communities who are not even connected to the government, let's assume that they have their own land. Now, as a community, they can take up an initiative where they will ensure plantation on their piece of land and they will take care of it for about 3 years minimum. After 3 years, the community would have an option. They can actually ask for compensation for that piece of land from the forest department. Now, why would the forest department do that? The government of India, as you know, each and every year extends its goals for forestation. The government of India, for example, wants to achieve as much forestation as possible. If the government can't do it from their own funds, from their own resources, it is easier for the government to just compensate the community who has grown a forest out of nothing, and the community itself would play a major role in taking India forward towards a green country. So this is the Green Credit Program. Now, as I told you earlier, the devil lies in the details. A lot of details are still to be finalized. For example, let's say you are a community who has undertaken this project, and now you want a compensation against that. Now, it's not that each and everyone will be eligible. You would have to fulfill certain guidelines that are finalized by the forest department. Only when you fulfill those would you be eligible for such an exchange. You know how the guidelines can keep on changing depending upon officers to officers, government to government, but it is a good initiative at least to begin with. Then there was also announcement of Pradhan Mantri Pranam, that is PM Pranam. If you have been following current affairs religiously in the past few months, you might say, sir, this is not something that we are hearing for the first time. If you actually realize this, the government of India a few months back did say that we will come up with something like the PM Pranam. Now, what exactly is this and what is the government trying to achieve through this? In simple terms, this is an initiative of the government to encourage states that in turn will encourage the farmers to go ahead and use alternative fertilizers. Now, India being an agrarian country has a lot of demand for fertilizers. Because a lot of our farmers are small-scale farmers, they can't afford to buy fertilizer or urea at the market rate. And that is why the government of India has to have a huge subsidy bill to ensure that urea becomes affordable for most of the farmers. Let me share a number with you so that you can actually see what is the impact of that subsidy. If you talk to farmers who have been given subsidized urea, most of the farmers would have to pay 6,000 rupees per ton of urea. Now, let's take a guess of how much is the real market rate. If you go to the market, the domestic manufacturers of urea, their cost of manufacturing urea per ton is 17,000. The gap is filled up by the government through its subsidy. Now, just imagine the scale of farmers that we have in India, the scale of farming, and then imagine what is the total amount of subsidy that the government now has to bear. This is a big, big problem that the government of India is now trying to solve through this by pushing farmers in a positive manner, saying that if you do not use your run-of-the-state urea and you actually go ahead with alternative source of fertilization, we might give you certain incentives from the side of the government. Apart from that, the government also is focusing on ways to build.
Before you go forward, please. I have a doubt regarding this.
Yes, sir.
Right? I'm pretty sure most of the students also would have the same doubt. So there are so many numbers that you have provided with, let's say, the PM Pranam scheme.
Right.
But what is the ultimate objective of the government of India by implementing this scheme now?
Right. So, as I said, if you look at the objectives that the government of India is trying to achieve through this scheme, there are a lot of objectives that are on the minds of the government. Number one, we need to push our farming towards a more sustainable form of farming. And that is not possible with the kind of profile that we have in our fertilizers. Secondly, because the government of India offers a lot of subsidy, as we just saw in case of urea, there is a case of our farmers using fertilizers on a much larger scale as compared to what they should. And that is why the overall productivity of our agriculture has not improved in such a speed as we had actually expected in the past couple of decades or so. So the government is hoping that this would give a positive push to the farmers to introduce a change in their behavior. So it would have, number one, economic impact also. It would ensure that the government does not have such a huge burden on its pocket. Secondly, the government is also trying to do good by our agriculture, making sure that we have healthier food to eat, making sure that we have a sustainable form of agriculture going forward. The other initiative that I want to talk about is the Waste to Wealth initiative. Again, something that the government of India had started some time back. It's not a new scheme. For example, the government of India has launched the Gobar Dhan scheme. Now, the interesting part is, which is the ministry that has launched this? Usually, when you talk about these kind of schemes, you would assume that is the Rural Development Ministry doing something, maybe agriculture, but actually it is the Jal Shakti Ministry that is behind this initiative. As the name suggests, the government of India wants the farmers to augment their income through some additional sources of income and not just focus on their primary source of income, that is agriculture. The government wants to train them to have much more generation of, let's say, biogas that can be used as a fuel later on. For that purpose, the government is coming ahead and saying, don't worry, we will invest money and we will set up 500 new waste to wealth plants. The government of India has also focused on the Mishti scheme that will be taken up for mangrove plantation. Now, mangrove again is something that usually is in the news whenever we talk about environment. The government of India and other governments around the world realize the importance of mangrove to such an extent that, in fact, in COP27, if you have been reading in COP27, we had a multilateral alliance especially for the mangroves that was launched. India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, multiple countries came together and they decided that yes, we need to take certain action to preserve mangrove in the long run. I'm sure all of you are very well aware of the importance of mangrove. All of you know the part that they play in not just preserving our environment, but also safeguarding the local communities against a lot of natural disasters. The government of India also came up with Amrit Dharohar, that is to take better care of our wetlands. Again, wetlands, mangroves, these are some of those parts of our ecosystem that have played a very, very important role in ensuring that the local community can have a lot of benefits. They can also have additional sources of income, and if required, we also can depend on them for ensuring that our environment is safeguarded. Now, this is just a very small screenshot, a snapshot of the huge details that would entail in the budget. As expected, the details will trickle down slowly, and as and when we come to know more about it, we will be discussing more of these. But these are the major initiatives that the government has focused on, mainly in the field of green growth. Now, the next major point under which the government of India released its budget was inclusive development in agriculture. For that, Shams, I would invite you to please take over and guide the students in that.
So under the inclusive development, Government of India has covered multiple areas, but let's restrict our discussion related to agriculture sector. Because agriculture sector is one of the very important sectors where, let's say, generally around 45% of the workforce in India is involved. And it's not that. Agriculture sector contributes to overall GDP as well as to the exports, to the earnings in terms of forex, etc. Now, in case of agriculture sector, what important announcements have been done? Let's have a discussion. The first very important announcement that you need to have a look at is agriculture credit. Annually, Government of India in the budget comes out with a certain amount of a target of how much loans have to be given to the agriculture sector. And I'm pretty sure all of you know to what extent the loans which are issued are important to the farmers, especially to the small as well as marginal farmers. So compared to last year, this year, the agriculture loan or the agriculture credit that has been targeted by the government has been increased from somewhere around 18.5 lakh crore rupees to 20 lakh crore rupees. So that one will ensure that there is a lot of credit inflow that goes into agriculture sector. Second very important one is Agriculture Accelerator Fund. Now, before I tell you what is the idea of an Agriculture Accelerator Fund which has been proposed now, let me give you a data which has been given by the Economic Survey yesterday. Economic Survey says there are thousands of agriculture technology startups in India, thousands. And a large number of them are concentrated in one area, that is supply chain of millets itself. And in the last 4 to 5 years, more than 6,000 crore rupees has been pumped in the form of private equity in agriculture tech startups. Now, focusing on the same idea of agriculture tech startups, the finance minister has announced that there will be a setting up of Agriculture Accelerator Fund. Again, this is just a proposal here. The whole idea is that for the startups which are involved in the agriculture technology, funding would be provided, they would be promoted, right? And that will contribute to the development of technology in the agriculture sector. And I'm pretty sure all of you know this. To what extent India in the context of agriculture technology is lagging behind, and how much important is the development of technology, research and development in agriculture sector. That's the second very important announcement. Third one, related to millets. Right? The year is International Year of Millets, which has been announced very recently. And millets in essence are nothing but these are grasses with certain types of seeds. For example, jowar, bajra, these are nothing but the examples of millets. India is one of the largest producer of millets in the international market. Just to give you a factual data here, India accounts for more than 20% of millets which are produced in the global market. And India is not just the producer, one of the very important exporter. India accounts for more than 60 to 70% of the total millet production done in Asia. More than 170 lakh tons of millets are produced annually in India. So citing all of this, or looking at all of these factors, the government of India today has announced that they will basically make India a global hub for millets. And another name that was used by the finance minister to represent millets is Shri Anna. Now, apart from this, in the context of agriculture sector, the finance minister also announced that they will be investing, or they'll be promoting investment and development of storage capacity. Now, why this is important? Annually, there is a large amount of production of the cereals as well as horticulture products in India. That is basically the output in the agriculture sector. But how many of you know that part of this production, both agriculture, that is cereals as well as horticulture, part of this production is destroyed, is wasted because we do not have sufficient amount of storage capacity. And because this is a destruction of agriculture production, the farmers who are involved in the cultivation of this, they will not be able to generate or earn sufficient amount of revenues, creates a distress in the agriculture sector, and more specifically, there is a disturbance in the supply and demand of these commodities, which might contribute to spike in the prices of the commodities in the market. So in order to address the issues that are faced by the farmers, the government has announced that they will be promoting development of additional storage capacity. And one more important announcement is, already the government in the earlier budget has announced Matsya Sampada Yojana associated with production of fishes, right? Again associated with Blue Revolution in India. And one more sub-component or a sub-scheme under the Matsya Sampada Yojana would be launched now, and the allocation for this Matsya Sampada Yojana sub-scheme will be more than 6,000 crore rupees. So these are certain very, very important announcements that the government of India has done in the context of agriculture sector. Now, having said so, please understand this. Whenever you talk about agriculture, are these reforms sufficient? You might simply argue, sir, these are good reforms, no doubt. But a lot of experts, right, estimated or expected that there would be some reform associated with, let's say, MSP, some reform associated with PM Kisan scheme, etc. Right? Again, Government of India, or let's say the Finance Minister in the budget speech did not mention PM Kisan as well as the concept of MSP. Right? So these are certain important areas of the reforms which have been covered in the budget under agriculture sector related to inclusive development. So the next fourth, that is the next area of discussion, fourth key pillar, key priority that has been covered in the budget will be the youth power, which will be taken up by Harshmeet, sir.
So please allow me to interrupt here once
Yes,
again. So as far as I know, in our economy, one big problem that we have been seeing is people are just not buying enough, people are just not consuming enough. And that is also why the businesses also now are facing a lack of demand. Do you think this budget particularly has done something to boost consumption in the general market?
Definitely, yes. I would completely agree with the argument that the budget which was announced by the Finance Minister today contributes to a rise in the consumption demand. And that's very, very important for a very simple reason. If you look at the first advance estimates which were announced in the month of January for the current financial year, you will realize that more than 60% of this, that is when GDP is calculated in different ways, more than 60% generally comes because of expenditure done by you, me, and anybody in the private sector. And the consumption demand, that is specifically the expenditure or the consumption demand. The consumption demand contributes a lot to the GDP like this. And in recent times, one of the reasons that has contributed to the slowdown and recession, again, not now, 2 years ago in the Indian economy was that people lost jobs. People were uncertain about their future, as a result of which people reduced their consumption, not the complete consumption, consumption of certain goods and services was cut. And when the consumption of goods and services is reduced, automatically you will see that the demand for these goods and services or the aggregate demand will go down. That will again snowball into lower production, lower employment, or let's say higher unemployment, lower GDP. Now, looking at the current year's budget, when you talk about, let's say, higher infrastructure investment, when you talk about, let's say, investment or in the form of, let's say, 20 lakh crore rupees loans given to the rural market, that is for the promotion of agriculture sector, etc. What is the outcome of all of this? The outcome is simple. The money supply in the economy is going to increase. That is, the money that goes to the households is going to increase. And that will basically lead to higher demand or higher aggregate demand for goods and services, thereby contributing to growth in the consumption and contributing to the growth in the economy. So now let's have a discussion on the fourth very important key pillar, that is the youth.
Thank you, sir. So the Government of India has actually announced a slew of measures, especially keeping the youth in mind. Now, when we say the youth, there have been a lot of different initiatives that have been taken by the Government of India. Now, be it ensuring that they have enough skills, be it ensuring that we focus on education, and also ensuring that we become a major source of very good skilled labor throughout the world. Now, let's have a better discussion on this with me going here on the screen. Now, if you actually look at how the Government of India has reacted to a very interesting situation that we are seeing globally. Just a few weeks back, you saw the population number of China actually come out, and we all saw how, for the first time in almost 6 decades, China's population has declined. Now, you might say, what does it have to do with India? But I would argue it has everything to do with India, India's youth, and the global opportunities that you might aspire for. Now, India right now is actually getting the benefits of a great demographic dividend. When we say demographic dividend, that means a major part of our population right now is in the working age. The average age of India is not even 30. That is why we have a lot of people who right now can contribute in the economy, and they can actually contribute more to taxes, to the GDP. This is where we have an advantage as compared to many other developed nations and even China. This is where there is one interesting gap that we have to fill. Just having a lot of people in the working age group would not really mean that the people would automatically be beneficial for the GDP. The gap that we have to fill is that of skills. Now, the interesting part is the word skill might have brought very different kind of examples about 10 years back. And today when you say, I require a skilled person, the kind of skills that you're talking about can be very, very different. For example, 10 years back, people did not really hear about robotics, AI, mechatronics. All these things have emerged in the past few years. And these are the jobs which nations around the world actually require. And this is where India has a great opportunity in ensuring that if we give proper skills to our youth in this kind of a field, the government of India can actually make sure that we become a net exporter of skilled labor. You know, the government of India has been running the Skill India program for some years now. This program will continue. However, the interesting part is the government of India, keeping in line with the present demands, would actually include all these things as well in the Skill India missions. So youth will be given training on AI, robotics, there will be 3D printing, drones, etc. In short, all those technologies which will enable our youth to ensure that they have a very lucrative job, not just in India, but also outside India as well. This is one very, very important takeaway because it is very heartening to see when the government realizes what is the need of the hour. Rather than government realizing it 10 or 20 years later, it is always important that the government initiatives stay one step ahead. And this is where we have a big, big advantage. The government of India is also looking for a Skill India digital platform, under which, again, the Skill India program is the central focus. And the government of India will make sure that in order to give as much support to entrepreneurs who actually get some skills and they can actually go on and build a business of their own, the government of India will provide as much support as possible. Interestingly, in this category itself, the government of India has said that we are focusing a lot on tourism as well. Now, the interesting part is, if you look at the government initiatives in the past few years, right from the very top, the Prime Minister himself, talking a lot about tourism and how it can have a very, very positive impact on India's economy. Just a few days back, you saw how the Prime Minister of India actually made a statement that if you travel across the country, you should make it a point to at least spend 5% of your expenditure in buying locally produced goods. That can give a big boost to the economy. Now, tourism is one sector that was hit very, very badly due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is also one sector that has a lot of auxiliary jobs related to it. Drivers, tourist guides, hospitality sector, cooks, people who actually have local shops outside the tourist places. All of that is the focus of the government. That is why the government has to ensure that there are attractive destinations for people to visit. We have to understand, we take it for granted, but there are very few countries around the world that can claim to be as diverse as India. Having deserts where you can actually see temperatures reaching upward of 50 degrees Celsius, having cold deserts where you can see temperatures going back to minus 50 degrees Celsius, having the wetlands, having all sorts of things that people are attracted towards. And that is why the government wants to give a boost to tourism also. The government also, interestingly, focused on setting up unity malls in state capitals, mainly to focus on something called one district, one product. Now, this is an initiative by the government of India that was launched some time back, wherein the government said that we expect every single district to make sure that they choose one single product in which they have unique skills so that they can promote those products. The government of India will also give a push to people to buy those products. It can be through GI tag, it can be through government's promotion, it can be through other initiatives. Now, what the government is trying to do is to give further boost to this one district, one product initiative. The government now would be setting up unity malls in state capitals. So, for example, you visit Madhya Pradesh, you visit Karnataka, you visit Tamil Nadu. In the state capitals, you will have these malls where unique products of districts of those states, especially, will be kept there for you to go, buy, explore, etc. Again, the hope of the government here is that underlying all of this, the government would ensure that our Amrit Piri have enough jobs Because it is one thing to say that yes, we are at a very advantageous position with a lot of youth being a part of our economy, but that can very easily be a big challenge if we are not able to provide enough jobs for them. So behind all these initiatives, what the government is not saying openly is that the government is hoping that all of these will bring in more and more jobs in all these sectors, which will in turn result into government having a better earning and the people having a better standard of living. There are other initiatives as well taken up by the government. For example, the government has increased budget in all the different areas which concern the youth specifically. The government of India, in fact, has also decided to set up multiple labs for state-of-the-art technology, AI, 5G, etc., where you would see a lot of new apps being developed and people across the country will be given a taste of that. So in the coming years, we'll have to see how this actually rolls out. Apart from that, there is one other very interesting point that the government of India focused on.
Harshmeet sir, before you move forward to the healthcare sector, since you are discussing youth, I'm reminded of one very important discussion that has happened recently. There are multiple reports recently in the newspaper stating that due to pandemic, the education sector has been affected, and especially it has been the primary education or children who are going to get the primary education who have been affected. You discussed multiple aspects of the announcements done for the youth. Don't you think Government of India has overlooked the primary education in announcing all of these areas?
That's actually a question that would force you to look at the budget very, very carefully. Now, on one side, you may say that the government has focused more on that sector that requires more jobs, that requires more employment. However, the interesting part is the headline of the budget in that sector is that the government's education sector budget is now the highest ever. Even when you look at the breakup of that, the budget given to higher education and the budget given to school education, both of these are at a very, very high level, much better as compared to what we had the last year. So that's a positive thing to look forward to. The other side of the story is, during the pandemic, as Sir rightly pointed out, there was huge number of dropout that we saw, and it was expected. Families did not have many jobs, they required as many people who could earn, so a lot of children dropped out from the school and unfortunately were engaged in child labor. However, the interesting part is, now we are seeing most of them going back to school. Even more heartening is that the enrollment ratio amongst the girls is improving drastically. So that is again something that the government has to be appreciated for, that is their focus on education. There has been multiple mention of the national education policy, and the government has been trying to implement a lot of its initiatives as well. Now, somewhere related to the youth also, we have the healthcare sector. You know, the entire world went through the most difficult travesty of our lifetime, and that is why not just India, multiple nations around the world have had a relook at their healthcare budget specifically. So what the government of India has said is that we will be increasing our health expenditure. The interesting part is the health expenditure did increase during the corona, the COVID lockdown years. But in the subsequent years, it was again cut down. Now the government has said that we are realizing that healthcare sector in India needs to have much more expenditure because of the simple reason. India anyways, if you look at the generic population, if you look at the per capita income, most of the people can't afford good private healthcare. In that aspect, it becomes the government's responsibility to take care of the people who can't afford private healthcare especially. And for that purpose, we have to ensure that the healthcare budget is enhanced, and that is what the government has said. The government has said that we will take it to 2.1% of the GDP. There are two ways to look at it now. One, yes, it is very appreciable. It has now crossed the 2% of the GDP mark. But now the interesting part is, if you compare this with some of the developed nations in the world, there are nations such as Israel, South Korea, that continuously spend over 4% of their GDP just on the health budget. So yes, we have a long way to go, but this is a good, appreciable step forward. The government of India also announced that the sickle cell anemia elimination mission will be launched. The government of India says that we will try to eliminate this deadly disease by 2047. Now, there are a lot of different programs that the government of India is running even today, hoping to eliminate certain diseases by certain time period, and this adds to that list. This is an initiative which has set a very long deadline, but this is keeping in mind the difficulty that we have. As you know, sickle cell anemia, basically, sickle is an instrument that you use in farming, so this is what the sickle would be. If you actually see this, so the red blood cells take up the shape of the sickle and they become very, very harsh and they don't move along your body. When the red blood cells don't move easily, they lose their elasticity. The flow of oxygen in your body also reduces, and that leads to very, very deadly outcomes. Sticking to the same field of healthcare, the government of India also has decided to open up many, many more nursing colleges. Now, one interesting sector of our economy that gets overlooked time and time again is that India is a net exporter of healthcare workers and not just doctors. Indian nurses, in fact, have been renowned all around the world for the kind of quality of care that they provide. You'll find a lot of Indian nurses working in the Middle East, and even in the European nations, there is a very, very large representation of Indian nurses if you look at those countries. So the government of India has realized this, that this can also bring in more development opportunities and make India a bigger net exporter of healthcare workers, and that is why 157 new nursing colleges will be set up. Similarly, the government wants to give a boost to ICMR also by setting up more labs, this time with participation from private medical research as well. We all saw the importance of ICMR, especially when the entire country was going through the pandemic. We all saw the importance of putting a lot more investment into medical research, and the government has thankfully learned this the right way. We have also been focusing on bringing new programs to promote research in pharmaceuticals. Now, in the beginning of this class, Shyam sir actually discussed about the need to have our own ingredients for pharmaceuticals, because we are a lot dependent on China to import those ingredients using which we actually make our pharmaceutical products. India is renowned as the factory of the world when it comes to generic medicines. However, in order to be self-dependent on that, in order to ensure that we are not dependent on China for our imports of the APIs, we have to ensure that there's much more research that goes on the field of pharmaceuticals. One other great initiative that the government of India had already taken earlier was launching the Jan Aushadhi Kendras, where you can get a lot of medicines at a fraction of their price just because they are not branded, they are generic. The government of India is taking forward the same ideology, making sure that healthcare becomes affordable to each and everyone, and people don't lose their life just because they are not earning as much money as someone else is. One other very interesting point that the government of India mentioned in its budget was how the government of India is now planning to take India forward, keeping our 100th year of independence in mind. Now, this is a long way away, but 2047 will be very, very significant. India will complete its 100 years of independence. So the government of India has already set up certain goals keeping that in mind. We already discussed how the government of India is trying to fight against sickle cell anemia, hoping that we are able to eliminate that by 2047. Apart from that, the government of India also realizes the role of women in Indian economy. We just had the amazing Republic Day parade, where the theme of Nari Shakti was the highlight. Not just this, the government realizes that in order to give the important boost to our economy, we need to ensure that there are enough women who are a part of the workforce. For that, we don't just need to give them enough skills, but we also need more women entrepreneurs. This is where the government has now set up an aim that 81 lakh self-help groups will be set up by the government of India, and they will be given proper training to make products that are in demand not just in India but across the world as well. The government of India is also giving due importance to the traditional artisans under the Pradhan Mantri Vishwakarma Kaushal Samman. The government of India has realized that with the introduction of more machines and technology, the traditional artisans are not getting their due. It is only when we go outside the country that we realize that those countries have certain traditional artists and we want to buy their stuff. But we undermine the significance of our own local artists, and the government of India wants to bring that back into focus. We've already discussed how the government of India is tapping into tourism by launching multiple tourist circuits, by launching schemes, and also one very interesting part that does not really get highlighted is that in the past few years, and you would have seen this around you as well, a lot of tier 2, tier 3 cities have been given airports. Now, this is a very, very, very welcome change because that now makes the connectivity towards tier 2, tier 3 cities much better. So that now if there is some attractive place to visit in those cities, we have a direct route there. The government of India has also ensured that especially in the field of green energy, we have enough jobs because again, there has to be a balance between demand and supply. On one hand, you are giving enough skills to youth. On the other hand, you also have to ensure that there are enough jobs to absorb all of them. And that is how we can have this equilibrium that will take the country forward. Now, the next theme of our budget was unleashing the potential, for which Shamsa will come here and take you forward. Over to you, sir.
Now, the fifth very important key pillar or the focus area for the government of India in the budget has been unleashing the potential. Under the unleashing of the potential, certain very important announcements have been done. Very often you will see that when the surveys are done, when the certain institutions will go to startups or certain businessmen or will go to agencies and seek their replies on certain survey, one of the very important concerns that is raised is Government of India should make it easier to conduct business. And in the context of making it easier to conduct business, now Government of India has made certain important changes to compliances and has made certain changes to decriminalize certain acts. Now, what are these? Let me show it to you. First, under ease of doing business, government, that is the finance minister today announced that 39,000 compliances have been reduced. Now, some of you might be thinking, sir, if the compliances are reduced, how it is beneficial? And first and foremost, please tell me what do you mean by a compliance? A simple definition of a compliance would be that any kind of a regulation that you're supposed to follow, right? For example, imagine you start a manufacturing company and the government of India says, if you want to work as a manufacturing company, you will have to generate all these receipts. Now, in order to generate these receipts, you will purchase a printer, you will purchase a laptop or let's say a computer, and to operate this particular machine, you will have to hire one more person. Now, some of you will basically say, sir, I will not do anything of that sort. I am a billionaire. I will hire a chartered accountant. There is a company which will offer all these services. I will simply hire the company, right, or take their services. But please understand this. Whether you appoint someone, hire someone in your company, set up all of this infrastructure, or you take the services of, let's say, a company outside, which will basically provide these services, nothing comes free of a cost. There's a very famous statement in the economy. There are no free lunches. Means whether you purchase a laptop, purchase a computer, hire a person to print the receipts, or you basically hire the services provided by an external company, everything will cost money to you. So, one of the ways to make it easier to conduct a business is reduce the compliance requirements. So, Finance Minister has announced that 39,000 compliance requirements have actually been reduced now. And is it the end? Absolutely no. In addition to this, the Finance Minister also stated that 3,400 instances have been decriminalized. And that is also very important. Because what if even smallest of your mistakes will be treated as a criminal offense? The criminal agencies, or let's say the investigative agencies, will come to your home, arrest you, you'll become a celebrity in the newspapers as well as various news agencies, and basically that will have a huge impact on your business. But more importantly, understand this. Your thinking is that it was a mistake, a small mistake. It is not such a big deal. Yes, it is a mistake. I should have penalized. I should have been penalized. I would have paid certain amount of penalty and then conducted or carried on with my business. But rather than that, now I've been treated as a criminal. I'm a criminal in the eyes of the law. Now, right, my businesses will be affected much more. Now, that is one very important announcement. Government of India has introduced or had made certain changes to promote ease of doing business in India. Second, production of lab-grown diamonds.
Shyam sir, I'm sorry to interrupt
Yes,
once
sir.
again. I know students want to know how to grow diamonds in the lab very quickly, but I would like to interrupt just for 1 second. Now, you said 39,000 of these compliances have been reduced, but would it actually make an impact on ground? Do you think it is enough, or there should have been some better measures, more drastic measures? Maybe, for example, many state governments are announcing that you come and open up your company, we'll see the paperwork later on. Do you think some kind of drastic measures were required, or this is good enough?
Now, whenever these kind of measures are announced, the point to note is, individually these measures might not look very great. Some of you look at it, sir, what if none of these 39 requirements are applicable to me? These are not applicable to my business. Then how do you say this will promote ease of doing business? So whenever you look at these particular measures, individually it doesn't make any sense, or it might make very little sense to you. But if you put together, right, all of these components in a pie chart, right, what do you mean by the components in a pie chart here? One, these measures. Second, let's say introduction of GST. Third, insolvency and bankruptcy code, right, or let's say single window clearance system, etc. Then you will realize that over the last couple of years, governments continuously, or let's say various ministries continuously have been implementing various measures which will ultimately lead to promotion of ease of doing business. Next, production of lab-grown diamonds. Now, tell me, who doesn't like diamonds? You will like diamonds. You will love diamonds, right? Or your spouse will fight with you for diamonds, just like mine. Generally, the idea is the diamonds which are available in the earth, right, which are mined out, the availability has reduced. Now, rather than being dependent on the diamonds which are available in the earth or in the earth crust, now there is a rising trend of growing diamonds in the lab, just like growing or producing meat in the lab. In order to promote production of lab-grown diamonds, Government of India says, we are going to promote this by reducing, let's say, customs duties. We are going to provide certain incentives in the coming days in order to promote more and more production of lab-grown diamonds in India. So that is the second very important area to unleash the potential for the Indian economy. Third one, an entity, right, DigiLocker will be set up. Again, this is just a proposal. Under DigiLocker, the government says all the requirements of multiple documents can be stored safely in this DigiLocker, can be used for distribution for requirement of any of the agencies. But again, this is just a proposal as of now. How it is going to be implemented, in what way it will be useful for various, let's say, stakeholders in the economy, for that you will have to wait and see. For a very simple reason, I keep on telling the students every time, many of these are just proposals. The details always lies in the, right, the implementation, or the key is always in the process of implementation. Over a period of time, government might realize this is not feasible, or government might simply say, we will use this entity only for these purposes, or we will change this into this, etc., etc., etc. So this is just a proposal as of now. One more way to make it much more easier to store, to transfer, or let's say to provide all these documents which are required by multiple agencies, especially from the businesses at multiple points of time. So these are the three very, very important areas of announcement. The next important area, that is the sixth very important key pillar of announcement, is reaching the last mile. That will be handled by Harshmeet sir now.
Thank you so much for that, sir. Also, one very quick advice to all of you. If you are still not using the DigiLocker app, please do use it. I really, really like this app. You can, as you know, you can download your official documents, be it the documents related to the vehicle that you have, your driving license, insurance, registration certificate, etc., your Aadhaar, etc., and you can actually carry that, and that has a validity of just being like original documents. Now, coming back, the next key point that the Government of India focused on in this year's budget was reaching the last mile. Now, what do you mean by reaching the last mile? India being such a diverse country, we have various sections of population that require the government's help more as compared to the others. You can calculate, you can actually categorize them into tribals. You can also say that these are the backward classes, these are people who have been discriminated against in the past. All of these are the responsibility of the government, and that is why the Government of India has ensured that we take steps so that they can actually reach at par with the other sections of the economy. Let's go there and see what are the different types of initiatives taken by the Government of India in this regard. The Government of India mainly focus on Pradhan Mantri, particularly vulnerable tribal group, that is PVTG development mission. Now, as you know, the Government of India has been focusing a lot on tribal development. Now, this includes a varied variety of announcements. This can also include the Eklavya model residential schools. These are schools that are based on the model of Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, which are renowned for their quality across the entire country. These residential schools mainly will be for the tribal community, so that their children can also get great education at par with anyone else in the entire country. You all know, India right now has its very first tribal president, and that is why the Government of India has been putting a lot more emphasis on the rights of tribals that should have been done much earlier as well. The government will also provide financial assistance for sustainable micro-irrigation in drought-prone areas of Karnataka. Now, you might say that why only single out a specific state? There are a lot of different states where the government has to provide these kind of issues. Now, in these issues, what usually happens is that government usually starts this as a small model or as a dry run and see how this actually pans out in a particular state. Once this pans out well, and once the government believes that it can be a successful model, these kind of models are then replicated in other parts of the country as well. We already discussed how the government wants to give a further boost to the Eklavya model residential schools by having even more teachers, by giving them much more facilities to ensure that the tribal community also becomes a part of the mainstream in India. The Government of India would actually continue giving free food grains to all Antyodaya and priority households for 1 year, as we have continued since the pandemic had hit the country. The Government of India also wants to focus on the long heritage that we have been very proud to carry forward. Under this, the Government of India would ensure digitization of ancient inscriptions. Now, you would have also seen many times that the tribal community, many of them who reside in the forest for many years, have their own way of life. They have their own knowledge system. They know that if they fall ill, how to cure them, what are different types of plants that they have to use. All that knowledge is hidden and passed on from generation to generation in the tribal community, to make sure that the other parts of the country can also take advantage of such kind of knowledge systems that are actually hidden in those tribal communities. The Government of India will ensure that under Bharat Shri, we take up digitization of all these ancient inscriptions. This is not just about passing on scientific knowledge. This is also about passing on literary knowledge, because you know there are a lot of manuscripts and inscriptions that might have a great cultural value. A part of the budget was also about the Government of India giving an outlay of the PM Awas Yojana, which was increased by 66%. So the budget allocation for this crucial scheme also got increased considerably. As you know, the Government of India has been putting a lot of focus on ensuring that everyone across the country, doesn't matter the size of the flat, doesn't matter the size of the house that you have, but everyone should have a residence that they can call their own. That is why the Government of India has taken multiple initiatives in the past few years as well. This includes ensuring that you get certain rebate on your interest. This also includes the government actually helping with subsidy of your first home loan, and the government continuing with the PM Awas Yojana. The Government of India has specially ensured that the vulnerable section in the society is at the center of the government's attention with this year's budget. Now, a lot of these schemes, and as Sir has pointed out earlier as well, it is very easy to announce these schemes and announce your intention. My intention can be that from tomorrow I will study 20 hours a day. My intention can be that from tomorrow onwards I will not sleep, I'll just keep on studying. But whether you are able to implement and ensure that your attention actually turns into reality or not, this is where the problem would lie. So yes, from the side of the government, the announcements are on the right track. The government has focused on those sections of society that do require the government's help more than the others. But again, it remains to be seen how in the upcoming financial year we see the implementation of all these projects. Now, to move on to the financial sector, to talk about the real numbers, how much is the government earning, how much are they spending, every single thing, we have Shyam sir, please.
The seventh key pillar that is covered in the budget for the next financial year is the financial sector. The finance minister has announced that there will be certain amendments done to the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, Reserve Bank of India Act of 1934, etc., in order to protect the customers or the interest of the customers in the banking sector. In addition to this, the finance minister also has announced certain tax incentives to be provided to the GIFT IFSC, that is the international banking units which will be set up in the GIFT IFSC. But one important announcement that basically is connected to the backbone of the Indian manufacturing sector as well as the services sector is the revamping of Credit Guaranteed Trust Fund for Micro and Small Enterprises. Now, what is the announcement? Why this makes much more sense for the micro and small enterprises? Let's try and understand it. The government earlier announced Credit Guaranteed Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises. Now, what is this idea of a Credit Guaranteed Trust? Simple. Imagine you are an owner of a micro enterprise. You will go to a bank, apply for a loan. But by the virtue of being a micro enterprise, your revenues, first and foremost, that is the earnings, are very, very low. Second, you are much more vulnerable to the events of the domestic market as well as international market compared to a bigger company. That is, let's say there is another wave of the pandemic. Again, hypothetically, I'm not saying there is another wave. Hypothetically, in India, there is another wave of the pandemic. Who do you think will be most affected? Micro enterprises or a very, very big company such as Adani's or Tata group of companies? And so, who do you think will be much more affected? You already know the answer to that. Right, so these micro, small and medium enterprises are very much vulnerable to the events that are taking place in the domestic market as well as the external market. Now, because of this, a bank manager will consider it very risky to give a loan to micro and a small enterprises compared to giving a loan to a very, very big company. Now, in this regard, government through SIDBI has implemented a scheme by the name of Credit Guaranteed Trust for Micro and Small Enterprises. Under this, the logic is very simple. Government of India set up a fund, and by installing or by setting up of a fund, they will guarantee to a certain extent the loans that are taken by the micro and small enterprises from the banking sector or from the financial institutions. And because now the bank is guaranteed that if a micro enterprise which has taken a loan doesn't repay it, I can get the reimbursement in simple sense. I can get the money back from the fund. One, the risk component of giving a loan will automatically go down. So as a result of this, what do you think will happen? One, risk component will go down, so the rate of interest charged on such loans should go down. And the finance minister in the budget specifically stated that because of the revamping of the CGT MSE, the interest rate on the loans given to the micro enterprises specifically or small enterprises here will come down by 1%, and that makes a huge amount of difference for a micro enterprise. Second, because now the banks are guaranteed, yes, there is a fund like this, they will issue more and more loans to the micro and small enterprises. So, two outcomes. One, rate of interest is supposed to go down, and second, revamping, I'll come to this, right? Second, loans are supposed to be issued for the micro and small enterprises now. Now, what do you mean by revamping here? It is nothing new. This scheme is not new. In the last year's budget, finance minister initially had announced that we want to revamp, basically restructure the CGT MSE. Now, in this particular budget or the budget which was announced today, finance minister stated they would be allocating 9,000 crore rupees under this scheme or this fund. As a result of this, large amount of loans would be guaranteed and issued to the micro and small enterprises. So that is the context of announcement of CGT MSE here. But please make a note of this. The CGT MSE is very, very important in the context of MSME sector, because I'm pretty sure all of you know this. The pandemic affected MSME sector much more, or the hardest hit or one of the very important hardest hit sectors in Indian economy because of the pandemic was MSME. So one way a relief has been provided to the MSME sector is this announcement, that is CGT MSE revamping. Now, this is the most important announcement that the finance minister has done in all these 7 key pillars. But should we stop the discussion of the budget after covering 7 pillars? Of course, no. Right, the key area that most of you are waiting for to hear about is taxation. Let's start. Now, multiple number of, or a large number of announcements have been done by the finance minister, starting with indirect taxes, where basic customs duties have been reduced, customs duties have been slashed, etc., to promote production of lab-grown diamonds, to promote the production of televisions in India, to promote the production of mobiles in India, right, etc. But you don't have to remember all of those reductions in the basic customs duties or customs duties, but because these are very, very large number of announcements. And moreover, UPSC doesn't ask those kind of questions. Now, what are the important areas of announcement then in the taxation? First one, tax exemption for the startups has been extended by 1 more year. Whenever you read about startups, one of the very important factors to define a startup is they will have to be registered within certain number of years. And because these are identified as a startup, the startups are eligible to claim 100% tax exemption. But now the question arises, what should be the tenure? Till how many years should we keep on providing this tax exemption to the startups? The exemption is supposed to end many years ago. The finance minister has kept on extending the tenure, right, or the period of exemption by 1 more year every time. And adding to that particular, right, let's say convention, finance minister today again announced that the tenure for which, or the time period for which the startups can claim tax exemption, 100% tax exemption, will be extended by 1 more year. That is the first very important announcement in the context of startups. Second, presumptive taxation limit for MSMEs has been increased. That is basically under the presumptive taxation. What is this idea of presumptive taxation? You have to pay taxes to the government, but to prove that you are paying the right amount of taxes, you will have to maintain all the account books. You will have to hire a person, expert, etc., etc. But there is a scheme called as a presumptive taxation scheme, under which you don't have to maintain the record books, you don't have to get all of these proofs of, or let's say the documents, but based on your amount of revenue, right, based on your revenue, the government will collect certain amount of taxes from you. Generally, the presumptive taxation rate is in the range of 6% for some, 8% for others. Now, the government of India states that, or the finance minister has stated that, for MSMEs, one more very important reform, the limit, right, or the threshold limit will be increased. Until now, it was 2 crore rupees, now it will be increased to 3 crore rupees, which means more and more MSMEs will get the benefit of the presumptive taxation scheme. Third one, cooperatives. The cooperatives which will be there in the manufacturing sector, now if they start manufacturing in the next 1 year, they will be getting a benefit of lower corporate taxes. That is, a tax rate of 15% is applicable on them. Next, EEE status has been provided to Agniveer funds. Government of India has announced Agnipath scheme. And once anybody is selected as an Agniveer, part of their salary will be contributed into a fund called as Agniveer fund. But generally, whenever these contributions are done like this, is it taxable, or can the Agniveer claim it as an exemption while paying the taxes? The government now says that the contribution, the earnings, as well as the withdrawal, right, whatever it is, that is the contribution, accumulation, as well as the amount of earnings, all of them will be exempted. It is not taxable. Next, as a result of all of these reforms, the amount of tax expenditure the government would be incurring, that is the amount of tax revenue that the government of India will forego in the next 1 year, will be 35,000 crore rupees. Many of the newspapers, when you read tomorrow, or many of the websites that you have already referred to, will say that it is 38,000 crore rupees. But please understand, on one side tax revenue has been foregone, and on the other hand, certain amount of additional tax revenue is being collected. If you basically account for both of them, the net or the total tax expenditure for the government will be 35,000 crore rupees. And finally, the most important one, right, as far as income taxes that you pay, that I pay is concerned, is a new personal income tax regime. Under this, what has been proposed? Simple. Earlier, 2 years ago, Government of India already had one taxation system, that is personal income tax system. In addition to that, introduced one more taxation system. Under that, there are multiple slabs. But the concern has been that despite having multiple slabs and calculating the income taxes, the taxes that you pay would be lower. Only around 5 lakh people, that is personals who will pay the income taxes, individuals who pay income taxes, actually chose that regime. And the reason that was cited by most of the respondents was, no exemptions are provided. If I don't get any deduction, no exemption, etc., why will I choose this tax regime? I'll stick to the earlier tax regime where no doubt tax rates are slightly higher, but I can claim multiple deductions. In order to improve the adoption of this new tax regime, now the latest tax regime or the new tax regime has been restructured. That is, number of slabs have been reduced. That's a first very important change. You do not have to by heart it. First and foremost, you do not have to by heart it. Number of slabs have been reduced. Second, until the last financial year, the rebate, the taxable income on which you can claim rebate, if your taxable income is up to 5 lakh crore rupees, you could claim a rebate. Now that has been increased to 7 lakh crore rupees. Please remember this. It has been increased to 7 lakh crore rupees. So these are certain very important announcements that the government or the finance minister has done in order to restructure, increase the adoption of new taxation system. Now, apart from this, where is the Government of India spending? Which sector accounts for the highest amount of expenditure? You do not have to by heart, but as usual, the highest amount of expenditure that the government incurs will be in the form of interest. What is this interest? It is, please understand this, right? It is basically the amount of the interest on the past loans that the government will keep on paying. And in addition to that, you will see transport sector accounts for more than 5.7 lakh crore rupees, defense, right, 4.3 lakh crore rupees, etc., etc., etc. So these are certain very important areas of expenditure to be incurred by the government. Now, in addition to this, one more table for you. Please do not by heart anything. This table basically provides you the consolidated data for 3 budgets. That is the actuals for the budget 21-22, because the financial year is already over. The revised estimates for the current financial year, because we are yet to finish the current financial year. And the third one, the budget estimates for the next financial year. What should you observe? One, the total amount of expenditure obviously has to be equal to total amount of receipts. That is, the income that is earned by the government is equal to expenditure incurred by the government. But generally, what you observe in the context of Indian economy, generally, is that the amount of revenue, or let's say amount of income, which is purely income for the government, is generally lower than the overall expenditure incurred. And that is the precise reason government is forced to borrow from the market. And the amount of borrowings that have been proposed by the government for the next financial year is more than 17.8 lakh crore rupees, which is slightly higher than the revised estimates for the current financial year. That is overall borrowings. Please do not be confused between the market borrowings as well as overall borrowings, right? So many of the newspapers, or let's say the websites, would have already told you, right, the market borrowings is somewhere around, let's say 11 net as well as 15, around 15.5 in gross. But the total amount of borrowings by the government in the next financial year will be 17.8 lakh crore rupees. Now, many of you will simply say, sir, it is very difficult to remember all of it. For you, right, basically you will have to remember deficit numbers as a percentage of GDP, which we will see now. We will see deficit numbers, we will also see the expenditure as well as income wherever or in which area government incurs. Now, let's have a look at the deficit numbers first. If you just observe this particular graph, you will realize that there are 4 deficit numbers which are given to you. And for examination, you need to understand only these 4 deficits, nothing else is required. What are these 4 deficits? One, fiscal deficit, obviously that is important. Second one is effective revenue deficit. Third one is revenue deficit. And the fourth one is primary deficit. And what do you observe? You will see that the fiscal deficit target for the current financial year, as per the budget estimate, was kept at, right, let's say 6.4%. And today, the finance minister has revised it and still kept it at 6.4%, which basically means government is on the path of fiscal consolidation. And you'll have to remember that. Why? Under FRBM document, government says by financial year 25-26, we will further bring it down, reduce it further to less than 4.5%. Now, next financial year, the target that the government has set up is 5.9%, which is on expected lines, which is basically, it's slightly on a higher side compared to market expectation, but on the expected lines. In addition to that, you will see that the primary deficit target has been lowered. It is much lower now, right? The effective revenue deficit as well as the revenue deficit, which are basically fixed at 2.9%, 2.3% and 1.7% of GDP. Now, these are deficit numbers. So, from where does the government collect money? If you say 45 lakh crore rupees, government collects money to spend 45 lakh crore rupees. From where does the government collect this particular 45 lakh crore rupees? Let's have a look at the representation of it. Generally, you will see that government, if I simply say government is collecting 1 rupee, government will collect it from different sources. And the most important source, which you should know, is the form of taxation. And if you see that government collects the money in the form of taxes, most of it comes from the form of taxes. For example, just have a look at it. You will see that the government is collecting corporate taxes, it is collecting income taxes, it is collecting excise duties, it is collecting GST. And if you add together all of them, and obviously if you look at the data, you will realize that most or the highest amount of tax revenue collection or tax receipt collection is in the form of GST. So, if you basically add all the sources of the tax receipts that the government has proposed, it is somewhere around 58 paisa, which means 58% of the total income of the government for the next 1 year will come in the form of taxation. And that's very, very important. Nothing new in this. Generally, it is on the expected lines, because if you see or analyze the earlier budgets, generally around 55 to 60% of the total income earned by the government comes in the form of taxes. But one important area that you need to observe apart from the taxation is the borrowings of the government. If you have a look at it, the borrowings of the government is on a higher level. That is more than 1/3 of the borrowings. Traditionally, if you see, borrowings generally is in the range of around 33%, 36%, 38%. Same can be seen even in the next financial year. Now, these are the sources of income. What about expenditure? Where does the government spend the money? Let's have a look at it now. And if you just analyze or just observe the trend of expenditure, you will realize that a lot of this expenditure generally government spends in the form of schemes. For example, you can have a look at it now. Central sector schemes, centrally sponsored scheme. Right? Generally around 20% or plus more than that, the government spends in the form of implementation of the scheme itself. In addition to that, another important area of expenditure is in the form of interest liabilities. That is, annually out of the total expenditure, how much money does the government pay on the loans that they have borrowed in the past. And the trend in the last couple of years has been that the amount of interest payment accounts for more than 20%, mind you, out of the total expenditure. And much more concerning factor regarding to this is, if you look at out of total revenue expenditure, right, in the last 1 decade, out of the total revenue expenditure, the interest payment, the amount of interest that is paid by the government would generally account for around 33 to 35%. But if you look at in the recent times, right, if you take out of the total revenue expenditure, the interest payment that is done by the government accounts for around 38% to 39 to 40%, which is on a higher side, which we need to contain. And that, please understand this, that one of the contributing factor of that is the pandemic. Now, this is the income as well as the expenditure profile for the next financial year. Right? Now, Having looked at all these 7 key priority areas, as well as the income, expenditure profile, and the important financials of the budget that have been announced by the government, what are the concerning areas? What are the problem areas that we need to be careful, right, before we come to a conclusion whether all of these are possible, whether we will achieve a growth rate of 7% or let's say 6.5% in the next financial year? That is the issue of concerns. As already mentioned, right, I'm pretty sure all of you know that, right, there is a issue of certain concerns, right? That is one, inflation. Second one is basically the Russia-Ukraine war, and the third one is basically the spread of pandemic in China, and the fourth one, very, very important, that is rising current account deficit as well as trade deficit. Let me start with the first one. If you basically look at the last 1 year, the government of India announced a budget in the month of February, and immediately after a month, there was the outbreak of Russia-Ukraine war. Now, whether you are on the side of Russia or Ukraine doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is very simple. There is no denying the fact that there is a huge impact of this war on the fundamentals or on the economy of India. You might talk in terms of, let's say, import of crude oil. You might talk in terms of, let's say, import of fertilizer, etc. There was a huge impact of it. In recent times, it has got moderated, but again, if the war continues, go to the next level, definitely expect impact to be on Indian economy again. Second very important point is, like I've already mentioned, inflation and recession. If there is a higher sustainable inflation, or let's say sticky inflation in the domestic market, international market, interest rate will go up, capital flight will take place, etc. That will dent a huge impact on the finances of the Indian economy. Third one is, like I already mentioned, pandemic in China. It will disrupt the supply chain. It will disrupt the trade between India and China. And finally, the fourth one, the ever expanding current account deficit, which is basically leading to outflow of the currencies from India, putting a lot of pressure on the rupee versus dollar exchange rate, depreciating and again contributing to expanding current account deficit as well as trade deficit. So whatever proposals have been done by the government, whatever financials have been provided by the government, always take these numbers with a pinch of salt. Why? If any of these 4 concerns that I've listed here materialize, if any of these basically materialize, what do you think will happen? Do you think if the current account deficit will widen, trade deficit widens, do you think exports will continue to grow from India? Don't you think all of these fundamentals that you're talking about, let's say, whatever data we have provided, don't you think that will be affected? Of course, yes. So these are some of the concerns. No doubt, these, if materialize, will have an impact, but let's assume everything goes smoothly for the Indian economy for the next financial year. But having said so, right, is there any factor which is in favor of India? Many of you will simply say, sir, you basically talk about these factors, right? We are concerned now, right? Should we end even the answer on this note? Of course, no. There are certain factors which are going to, or which are working in the favor of India, which are expected to continue to work in favor of India. That is, no doubt, China is one of the very important manufacturing centers. No doubt, there is a trade relation with China. We are import dependent on China. Having said so, in recent times, many of the countries, many of the manufacturers have started adopting the strategy of China plus one. That is, rather than getting concentrated in only one country, being dependent on one country, they are trying to diversify their trade. They are trying to diversify their, let's say, imports, exports, etc. by focusing into other countries. And one country which gives them a lot of hope is India. In this context, yesterday itself, IMF stated that most of the growth in this year will come from India as well as China. Second, although inflation is a concern, no doubt, but like I've already mentioned already, inflation has been moderating. But only concern is it has been sticky. Core inflation has been sticky, food inflation is a concern. Third one, if you talk about investments in India, multiple analysts, multiple experts pointed that private capex, private capital expenditure has got stagnated in the recent times, etc. But if you look at what has been the overall flow of FDI into India, for this year, we are expecting the total amount of inflow of FDI to cross more than $100 billion for the first time. And on the other hand, if the CAD is a concern, right, the depleting forex reserves is a concern, then there is a good news for you people. India is going to receive more than $100 billion for the first time ever in the form of remittances, as per World Bank report. So no doubt there are concerns, but having said so, there is a silver lining in every one of them. So these are certain very important points which will work in favor of India in the coming year and ensure that India will continue to remain a bright spot in the global market. So that's it for the budget discussion. If you like the initiative, hit the like button, provide your comments in the section below, and if you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do. But before I wind up, I would remiss if I don't thank my friend, my colleague, Harshmeet sir, who happily, basically was happy, very much happy, involved in the presentation of the budget. Thank you. Have a great day. Good night.